This is Shamron, and you're listening to Open Hearts, Hidden Truths. Addiction, homelessness, prison, January 6th. Daniel Gray is my guest who's joining me today, and he shares a number of pivotal moments that altered the trajectory of his life.
So I was born in Blackpool, England, and my mother is she's English, raised in Africa and Australia, and my dad is from McAllen, Texas, on the border. And in England, we were like a very churched family. We were part of a place called Living Stream Ministries. We had an open door in our house, so there was always people in and out of the house. And I have two brothers. I have an older and a younger brother, and I had a sister born when I was about 8 years old. And she was born severely disabled because she's what they call a breech presentation, where she came out feet first, and that caused the umbilical cord to suffocate her. So she came out with some severe, like mentally handicaps. And so we came to America when I was 8 years old, and we moved from Birmingham, England, to Irving, Texas, because my family wanted to see about getting a better standard of healthcare in America than in England. And so, my first experience with America was I love this place. It's like, you go to a gas station, they have 15 sodas versus what England had. You can get a big gulp that's like this big. I was just blown away. And so, yeah, I loved it. I dropped my accent in like 6 months, my parents said. I was talking like I was Texan. I really wanted to be an American. And, unfortunately, my sister, she had some difficulties and she ended up passing away at a young age. And so, as is pretty common when that happens, my parents, they separated. It was a very volatile time in my life. I moved in with my dad. He was a software contractor, so he did a lot of traveling. So we went from Irving, Texas to Houston to Galveston to Atlanta, Georgia to Jacksonville, Florida, where I am now. And at some point he moved on when I was 17. I went back to England and I did my education. So I did 2 years of education over in England. I did my A-levels, which is funny because I actually dropped out in 9th grade in America. And then I went to England and I did a very competitive A-level. And I actually did okay in that. And I came back to America, I was probably 20 years old, and I just started working in bars. And so about 25 years old, I decided that I wanted to do something with my life, and it wasn't education-based. I was like, I want to do something different. And I was always a big martial arts fan, so I started training in martial arts. And I walked into a gym, and I met my mentor. His name's Roberto, and I've been training with him for, probably 20-odd years now. And I wanted to become a professional fighter, so I started taking amateur fights. I took a pro fight. Got my butt kicked pretty bad in that one, but became friends with the guy that I fought. And he was actually he wasn't from Thailand, but he was living in Thailand, and he came to America. We fought in America, and he went back to Asia, and he was like, you should move to Asia. And so I did it. It was during the real estate crash. I owned a house that had lost all of its value.
In terms of time periods, this is around '08?
This would be right around, I think 2010 is right when I left to go to Asia. But yeah, it's right around 2008, 2009. So I ended up moving to a place called Hsinchu, Taiwan. And I was actually living in Jubei and Hsinchu. And, people don't know, Taiwan's a small island off the coast of China. And the reason I went there was because a friend recommended it to me. They're always hiring English teachers. So if you're Western, there's plenty of work over there. They'll pay you well. And it's a small island, so there weren't a lot of martial artists there. And so I went over there just completely on a whim. I had one friend that I made contact with. I made contact with one other guy, and I just ended up selling all my stuff at the flea market with my ex-wife, and we flew to Asia, and we moved in, and I ended up spending 3 years over there. And I fought twice. I lost both those fights. I was never a great fighter. I was really good at losing. But I went over there, and I started working for a gentleman named Sung Min Yen, and he owned a company called Tough MMA. And I came in as a jiu-jitsu instructor, and I worked there for a little while. I helped him build out a really big fitness program that ended up being really successful. And, at some point there were some strains. It's hard living in a non-English speaking country. It's hard. Taiwan is full of Taiwanese people. So if you're Western, you're going to stick out. There's a lot of attention on you all the time. There's no real privacy. They don't really have a standard for privacy like we do in America. They kind of live on top of each other. And so it was very difficult on my ex-wife, and it was hard on me too. And so we ended up coming back to America again. And that was hard for me, because I walked away. They offered me a gym in Taipei to run, and it just kind of felt like I was living this crazy dream. I'm overseas, I'm fighting, and I'm being offered opportunities, and I kind of had to pack it up and come back. But coming back from Taiwan put a big strain on us. I think she really wanted a simple life. And I just have this thing in me where I just always had to be pulled towards the adrenaline for some reason. And so we're living in Jack's Beach, and I got a small place. It's right by the ocean. It's $530 a month. I can see the ocean from my window. I'm running a martial arts program. I'm traveling with this rock festival as a bar manager too. So, I look back and, I wrote about this a lot in prison, but I look back and I'm like, man, that was like actually a really calm and peaceful time in my life. But I was just so unsettled, And so I just had to make a change. It was just I felt like I was getting old at the beach. And so I took a job with a company in Atlanta, and I moved to Atlanta. And in Atlanta, I ended up running this gym, and it was like right in the center of the city. It was full of like, actors and musicians. And so, I ended up, my social circle just became different. And I just started partying. I started going out. I got into drugs, and that just, I mean, it just tore my marriage apart right in front of me. And it ended really badly. And I don't really discuss that. Even in the book, I've redacted those parts because she deserves some anonymity in all this. But it ended really badly. And, so what I did was I just got in my car and I drove to Las Vegas. And I'd always had this thing. I always wanted to live in Las Vegas because I used to visit there. They have some of the best bars there. I'm a bartender. They have some of the best fight gyms there as well. And so I just did it on a whim. I sold everything I owned and I drove to Las Vegas. And I moved into a small apartment outside of Fremont Street. And it was like 300 square feet. And I took a job working for a nightclub. Like I was doing a promotions job. And I got myself around, like I'm on the Las Vegas Strip and I'm like, knees deep in the turmoil of Las Vegas. And I'm out till 5, 6 o'clock in the morning with some of the people that I met, and next thing you know, I'm like way in partying. I'm out of control, drinking every day. I'm snorting cocaine like all the time. And I end up like ordering some cocaine off the dark web. This is a really wild story, but so it turns out not to be cocaine. I overdose on fentanyl. I end up biting my tongue in half. I chip my front tooth. Everybody thinks I got that from
Hold up,
fighting.
slow down. You're getting really juicy now.
Yeah,
Um,
we can stop right here if
wh-
you want. I'm happy to.
n-
Yeah.
no, what possessed you to buy drugs on the dark web? If you want to get your drugs, why not go to a typical dealer?
Well, I thought I could get a better deal. And like, this is kind of a side story, but I was familiar with the dark web when Bitcoin first came out. That's actually, there's some stuff in my book about that, but I bought Bitcoin for like $2 and $3 back in the day, and I have nothing to show for it. So I had some experience with how the dark web worked anyways. I was around guys that were hustling on the strip and I was like, let me get myself into this, And so I was basically trying to get plugged in somehow. And I had almost no experience with cocaine. I really started using cocaine about 2 months before I went to Las Vegas. My entire life I pretty much said no to it. I worked in the bars and I always saw the people on cocaine as being people who were like kind of uppity, jittery people. But the next thing you know, now I'm doing it. And so, it was just a very irrational decision. And I didn't even know, like, obviously somebody else would have known that this wasn't cocaine. I didn't. And I stayed up all night and I was doing this drug and I'm walking down the Las Vegas Strip and I'm like, the link is, and I'm looking at the sign and it just spins out of control. And like, I go, I need help. And then it just blacked out. I felt like I was swimming in these bubbles. It was really weird. And then I wake up, I'm in the back of an ambulance and, they're like, you had 2 tonic-clonic seizures. You have a huge gash in your tongue and so on and so forth. And, I just kept going. I didn't stop. I did try to get my life together. I took a job selling timeshare.
How long were you in the hospital
I
for?
was there for that night. I went out and bought a bottle of whiskey and went home. I sat in my little apartment, cried my eyes out because I knew it was hopeless. I knew I was in a bad spot. But I had no idea how to change. And I was so deep into it, that there was no desire to really change. I just kind of felt like I was driving myself towards an expected end. But I did. I mean, there was a part of me. I tried to get my life back together again. I started selling timeshare and I met these wonderful Christian people and I still follow some of them on social media. And then COVID happened, and COVID just shut the whole thing down. I wasn't even following the news. I was like, what's this COVID stuff? And next thing you know, like the entirety of Las Vegas is just abandoned. And I'm like, I had these photos on my phone of walking down the strip and just the entire strip is vacant, but the signs all blacked out. It was just like almost like a horror movie or something. And so I had to pack it up and I moved to Austin, Texas to go stay with my dad during COVID. But I was just drinking, I was just putting a bottle of vodka or whiskey down a night. And so I go into conflict with them. I get kicked out of that house. So I ended up moving to Atlanta and I used to live in Atlanta. So I went back to my old job. They hired me. And then I get back into the 2020 election comes around. I'm so full of grievance. I'm so upset about COVID. And I get into all the conspiracy stuff, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff and the mail-in ballots and everything else. And, I was living outside of Fulton County, which is a very, people talk about that a lot. And, I just took it on myself and I was just posting all this crazy stuff. And I was, I look back and I'm like, a lot of the stuff that I believed, I didn't know it was true. I just believed it. I saw images on, a computer of like, oh, this is this and this is this. And I'm like, I'm putting two and two together. And it, now that I'm in a more sane mindset, I have to question if anything I ever believed was ever real. I don't know. I mean, is it important? But
So
anyways,
you went down these rabbit holes, it sounds like,
yeah,
online, and it just wasn't good for you, especially with your substance abuse. Do you
yeah,
think you were
100%.
do you think that substance abuse contributed to maybe some paranoia or to some things, some beliefs going down these rabbit holes?
I don't see how it couldn't. I mean, I was self-medicating every night, but I think, when I've really done my best to study myself and how I got here. And I think a lot of it had to do with, I just allowed myself to be so full of bitterness and just anger. And like, anger is directional. You can't hold anger in. It has to release to something.
What were you so angry about?
Honestly, now that I look back on it, I was just angry at myself. I was just angry at myself for tearing my own life down. I had this great martial arts life. I had a great marriage, and I was really working towards something, but I just didn't allow myself to be settled or to even be grateful for everything I'd done at the time. When I came back from Asia, I felt like a failure because I'd lost a bunch of fights, but I'd done all these cool things, and I just didn't give myself credit for it. And I think that spilled out into my marriage, and it kind of spilled out in everything else I was doing. And then, the consequence of that is that everything falls apart around you because it's not sustainable. And so when everything fell apart, it was just easier to blame the things that fell apart than it was for me to take accountability for it. So I'm sleeping on the floor of a friend's house. I'm working a job that like I'm doing a sales job for a gym, and I'm just really conflicted. I'm drinking insane amounts of alcohol. I wasn't partying like I was in Las Vegas because the access was different, but I was still getting myself into drugs and stuff and going to the wrong places. And the election comes around. I'm sitting inside of this apartment. Half the city is shut down, and I'm like scrolling through all these like COVID conspiracies, and then that kind of spills into the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, and a lot of other things, and like the Rothschilds and all this crazy stuff. And I like fully convinced myself that there's like this global conspiracy, and it's tied to this election, right? And whatever you want to think about that election, that was my mindset. And so we were all kind of like this online community of people. We were all kind of like hoping this thing was going to go to the courts and the courts were going to resolve it, and that just didn't happen. And so, the thought process was, well, what happens next? And so President Trump, he posts on his social media, he's like, there's going to be a protest in DC on January 6th. It will be wild. And I'm like, okay, well, this is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to do. And so I walk into my boss's office and I'm like, I go ask off 3 days to go to this protest, and I always joke that he probably thought I asked for 3 days off to go try to overthrow the government or something, but he's like, no, you can't go. And he's like, you're one of my best sales guys. And I'm like, well, I am going. And he goes, well, if you leave, you're going to be fired. And I'm like, well, fire me. This is how committed I was to this thing. And, I go, I get on a plane and I go to the protest, and I go by myself, and I do get an Airbnb with a mutual friend who lived in the area. And that takes us up to the date of January 6th. So I don't know if you want to go a different direction or whatever.
I'd love to hear about, the events as they pertain to you and your story. Because January 6th is a significant event in your life. It altered the trajectory of your life, did it not?
Oh yeah, I would absolutely say it did. So I go to I'll just go through it really quickly. I go to the protest, and like I remember it's freezing cold. Like my shoes were like wet. I had Converse on. It was like raining a little bit, and so my feet were so cold. And like it takes Trump like an extra hour to get on stage, so we're all kind of restless. And there was like I literally probably 2 million, 3 million people there. It was an enormous crowd.
What's the energy like? Like, what are people saying? What's the general vibe and energy there?
So this is kind of contrary to what most people believe, but January 6th was like one of the most jovial and like celebratory events I've ever been to. Like people were dressed like Uncle Sam and like Lincoln, and like people were playing YMCA on boom boxes, and everybody's kind of handing each other stuff. And I always say this, like, it's important to remember that the majority of people who went to January 6th did not behave the way that I behaved that day. You know, you're talking about a million people or multiple millions of people, and out of that, there were 1,500 arrests. So, you know, you have to give a lot of grace to people too, because, you know, just even that name can kind of, it brings connotation out with it. But so anyways, you know, Trump talks for like an hour and a half. And it was like, honestly, it was a little bit underwhelming. I thought he was going to bring Biden out in chains or something. Like I really had this delusional idea of what was going to happen that day. And then he tells everybody, he's like, go ahead and march down. He said like peacefully and patriotically go protest at the Capitol. And so I wait to the end of the speech, and then we all walk down the lawn on Pennsylvania Avenue. And it was like, it's about an hour walk to get there. I mean, maybe 45 minutes to get from the White House to there. And it was like, you know, high-fiving, hugging, everybody's having a great time. And I get to the Capitol, right? And by the time I've got to the Capitol, there's already 30,000 people at the Capitol, and they're on the steps, they're on top of the fountain, you know, like, so I walk up and I'm just standing with this crowd, and we're waiting to hear the results of what's going to happen inside. Like, I don't even understand the process. This is, you know, anyways, I don't really know what's supposed to happen, but I know it's supposed to be important. And so nobody's cell phone works because, you know, there's too many people in the same spot or whatever. And so people are like winding up those ham radios, and we're listening to those, and it's like quiet as a mouse. Like you can hear a pin drop. And just like as it was quiet, all of a sudden, like 5 or 6 people in the crowd, they all go, "Pence betrayed us," and the crowd pops. I mean, it just like it moves like an ocean, you know. And like I got completely separated from my group. Like I couldn't find them till later on in the day. And so I see like a scuffle between the police and the protesters happening at the front of the I guess the protest line. So I'm like, I'm going to walk over there and I'm going to take a photo and I'm going to place it on my Instagram. This is the dumbest thought I've ever had in my entire life. But like, this is how quickly things can escalate, you know? So I walk up, I take my phone out, and I have a cop, they just snatch my phone out of my hand, and then they pepper spray me in the eyes. And so I run backwards. I'm like, I need water. I need water. I clear my eyes out, and I just get overcome with this like just rage. Like it was like, and I write specifically about this in the book that I wrote, but it's like this overwhelming sense of like life has been incredibly unfair to me. Nothing is working in my life right now. I don't care about anything, and you will not do this to me, you know. And it was just a moment where I went forward.
But the picture that you took was, what was it of, and where were you? Were you inside the Capitol? Were you?
No, I saw him at the bottom of the Capitol steps, right? I'm right in front of it, and there's a police line and there's protesters, you know. And I didn't get to take a picture because my phone was taken out of my hand before I got to take it. But I was hoping my thought process was I was going to take a selfie with the cops behind me, and it was going to be something funny to put on Instagram. But, you know, that didn't happen.
So you never made it inside the Capitol?
Oh no, I went inside the Capitol. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Take me through that.
So I put my back to the police, you know, and there's like pepper spray and there's like clubs swinging and everything. It was just a wild scene. And I get pushed through the other side of the police. And I look over to my right and I see this guy, and he's like a heavy set guy with a beard, and he's like doing like this, like, "I'll give you a boost," you know? And so I just ran towards it. You know, I didn't really have any purpose or direction. I just had no idea what I was doing, but he offered me a boost, you know? And so he boosted me onto the staircase. And when I look at the timeline, I was probably on the staircase for about 10 minutes, but it felt like 25 seconds. You know, and we're kind of crushed in, and these police come with shields and they try to push us down off the staircase. And so I duck into a little ball and I end up on the opposite side of them. Then I run up to the top and I'm looking at a police officer, and he shoots a canister of tear gas and it lands right at my feet, and it just explodes all over me. And so like, I'm just choking on this tear gas, you know, and I'm like, ugh. And I look up and I see a staircase, and I look back behind me and there's like a 20-foot drop, and then there's the staircase that I came from. And so instinctively, I just run up the staircase and I take a right. And I go through this tunnel, and I end up at the very front door of the West Terrace entrance, right? And so this, like, if you're into the January 6th stuff, this is a big moment, because I'm standing at the front door of the West Terrace entrance. I'm arguing with the police. You know, I'm like, "You guys just stole my phone." And I honestly don't remember what I was.
Let me ask you, are you high? Are you drunk?
No. Sober as the day is long. Yep. Unfortunately, I can't blame it on alcohol or drugs. This is just my reactive personality showing through. And so I'm standing at the front door of the Capitol, and there's 3 police officers, and they turn around and they just walk inside and they hold the door open, and I just follow them in. And, you know, the video has been viewed probably 1 billion times. It's out there. And I walk inside and I see the person who I believe stole my cell phone. And I walk over and I ask for my cell phone back like 6 times. I'm like, "Hey, can I get my cell phone back? Can I get my cell phone back?" And I'm like doing like this. But I'm being a menace, you know, like I'm not trying to be innocent in this whole thing. I'm with a crowd of protesters. I'm being antagonistic to the police. I just put my back to them and got pushed through them. Like I'm definitely being confrontational. I'm screaming things I probably shouldn't scream. Um, and so this crowd surges forward. I turn around. I'm like, I look at the crowd. I go, stop. I turn back around. I see there's a staircase. The officer, I believe, stole my cell phone, is running out the door. And so I kind of just go, okay, well, that's enough. Like, and then I'm inside of the rotunda and this cop, he yells, it's a felony to be in here. And so I'm like, I snap back to reality. I'm like, oh, this isn't just a misdemeanor. This isn't just trespassing, And so I walk out the Capitol building and I walk around DC for about an hour and a half. I had to figure out how to get back to my apartment. I didn't have my phone. I had another phone, but it didn't have like data on it, So the phone that I had was taken. So it took me forever to remember the address, and I walked all the wrong way down the street, and I had to walk all the way back. And I get home, and I managed to log back into my Facebook, and it's just gone crazy, like, hey, are you okay? And all this stuff. And, so I kind of realized like this is a big deal. This is a big moment. But I just thought it was like a day's worth of news, And so the next day I actually go back to the Capitol because like I wanted to see if there was trash everywhere. I had this weird thing that I wanted to see if the people cleaned up after themselves or not.
But why?
Because I had this thing where like the Japanese baseball fans are notorious for cleaning their stadium after they leave. And I think I wanted to believe that the people at the protest were good-hearted people and they didn't leave trash on the lawn. But that's maybe not the whole explanation. I think a part of me wanted to go back and just kind of see the scene again. And so I go back and I immediately get swarmed on by like 30 officers. I get handcuffed. They question me for like 45 minutes. I just deny everything. Eventually they let me go. And so I go to the airport to fly back to Jacksonville, and I make a 4-minute video telling the entire story. I just from start to finish, like I told you, and I post it on Instagram, And so by the time that I hit the ground, I'd already been turned into the FBI. And so I go to work the next day. I walk into my job. My job is very left-leaning. It's in Atlanta, and nobody will make eye contact with me. I literally went back to work the next day after this. That's how absurd this whole thing is. And they're all like, everybody's like looking at the ground, and I'm like, oh, I've been turned in. This is, So I hop a car and I drive to Jacksonville, and I ended up homeless, and I was sleeping on the shop floor of a friend's job, and I was doing some outside work.
Wait.
And
Did you get fired, or wait? What do you mean you
I
wound
just
up
left.
homeless?
I'm sure I was fired, but
So you
I'm
just
sure.
you just left. You didn't even stick around to see. You booked it. You hightailed it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I was planning on leaving Atlanta anyways. I was miserable there. I had friends there, but my social support system is in Jacksonville. So I was leaning towards going back to Jacksonville. I was dating a girl who was in Jacksonville at the time too. And so I was already halfway out the door. And then when that happened, I was like, this is probably the perfect time to go back to Jacksonville.
Now, so
And
you
so
went. Okay, so you're back in Jacksonville. This
mhm,
is how long after January 6th?
January 8th, like,
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
And
like
so, but how did you wound? You said you wound up homeless.
so I didn't have a place to go. I was dating this girl. I was staying with her mom, but it just didn't work out. And so I ended up moving into a friend's job site. Like I was doing, I don't want to name the business obviously, but I was doing outside work, like outside in the sun work. And they had an office I could sleep in. So I put a mattress in the office and I slept in the office. And, I was just going to, my thought process was I'll just save up some money. I had a car, the car got repoed. So I needed to get a new car, and I was just going to build my way back up again. And, I stayed in there for about 3 months, and then summer hit. I'm too fair skinned to be outside in Florida in summer. So I took a bartending job with a friend of mine, and I moved into a friend's couch. And so I was settling in, had a few $1,000 saved up. I bought a truck, and I was like, all right, cool. This is going to be okay. And then on May 17th, I'm driving to the beach, and I see police cars behind me, and I assume that they're pulling the car over behind me over. He moves out the way. They get behind me, and then the next thing you know, it's like, driver, stop your car, get out the vehicle. And so next thing you know, I got my hands out the window. I'm walking back towards the sound of this guy's voice. I completely think it's mistaken identity. So I'm like, they got the wrong guy. There's no way. And they handcuff me and they pick me up, and I see all these FBI agents, and I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what this is.
So you're arrested for January 6th.
Mhm.
How does that unfold? What's the next step in that?
So I get arrested by the FBI, and like they were actually really cool. Like, people don't like me saying that as a January 6th defendant. I'm supposed to hate the FBI, but those guys were nice to me. Like they were not malicious. They didn't try to prod or pry into anything more than they could have. They could have made my life a lot more uncomfortable. I ended up like kind of getting to know them on the ride. We talked about martial arts and stuff. One of them trained at my friend's gym, so it was like, okay. And so I go spend a night in Duval County because the Fed building isn't open at that time. And I don't know. I have no idea what I'm facing, what I'm in for. I just know I'm in there. And the next morning, the FBI comes to pick me up, and they give me a sack of like a Burger King bag. Here's some food. I'm like, cool, I'll eat that. It's better than the prison food. I go into court and I sit down, and they start reading off my charges, and they're like, "You're facing 37 and a half years in prison." And I started laughing. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, "There's no way this is real."
What were
And
the
then
what were the charges?
so I had the biggest one is I had the obstruction of Congress or obstruction of an official proceeding. It's the 1512 charge. It becomes important later on in the story, but the Supreme Court ended up taking that charge up, and had an officer assault charge, and then I had a slew of misdemeanors, just like parading and picketing, remaining in a restricted area. Like generally speaking, in a federal prosecution, they're going to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And so I had 7 misdemeanors and 2 serious felonies, and so I'm like, oh man, I'm never getting out of here. And I look over at my attorney and he goes, "You have a $25,000 bond." I'm like, "Well, I could probably get some money together." And he goes, "No, you just have to sign it and you're out of here." I'm like, what are you talking about?" He goes, "It's a signature bond. You sign this, you get to walk out the door today." So I literally just got arrested by the FBI at gunpoint. They take me into prison or jail. I find out that I'm basically 40 years in prison. And then like the FBI comes in, gives me a bag of food, shakes my hand and tells me to come back in a week. And I just walk out of the prison.
Is that is that common? I don't know anything about that. Is that common to do?
It can be common. Yeah, it can be like, the prosecution has to make a case for the fact that you're a flight risk in order to detain you because you're still innocent until proven guilty. So if they can prove that, like, for example, you have access to a jet or you have a history of running or something like that, then they're gonna detain you while you're awaiting trial. But they had no good cause to say that I was going to be a flight risk. I'd never committed a crime in my life before this. And so, they let me go. And so I spent 3 years under indictment, and I spent 3 years starting from zero. I had a truck and I had a couple $100 in my account. And so I had to get work. I had to find places to live. I became a perpetual couch hopper. And the story gets interesting, and this is a big part of the book I wrote too, is about a year after I was under indictment, I ended up working with this girl, and she's an African-American, heavily tattooed liberal woman. We're still friends to this day, but we end up dating. And she's like militantly liberal. Like if you went on her social media page, you'd be like, why is this woman dating a January 6th defendant? But she ended up becoming my biggest supporter, and she moved me into her house, and she took care of me, and she I have to give her credit. I would not have gotten through that if she didn't step by my side and really jump in. And so it was absurd. I'm facing this federal indictment. I'm a January 6th defendant. I have an estranged relationship with my family, and the only person that I'm communicating with or is really by my side is this heavily left-leaning person, militantly left-leaning person.
How did you two how did that come about? I know they say opposites attract, but this
I know, it's crazy, yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, she just moved down from Salt Lake City, right? And so she didn't know anything about me in the media. I was pretty well known in Jacksonville, from the January 6th stuff, but she didn't know anything about it. And so we ended up connecting. And so I took her out on a date, and I took her out on a second date. On the second date, I said, "I need to tell you something. I'm one of the January 6th defendants." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Remember when they stormed the Capitol? I'm one of the guys from that." And she lurches forward and she goes, "I was screaming at you on the TV that day." And I'm like, "Well, is this a deal breaker?" And she's like, "Honestly, no, it's not." But I don't think she knew what she was getting herself into.
What did she get herself into?
Well, she ended up standing by my side for 3 years, all the way through my plea agreement, all the way up until, my sentencing. And the majority of the time that I was in prison, she was right by my side. She ended up leaving me about 6 weeks before I left prison. And, that takes an enormous toll on somebody. People in prison, they don't have relationships on the outside, family or anything really. The world moves on. And, that was a tremendous ask on my part, the entirety of this relationship needs to be, in the shadow of a federal indictment and this news media attention and everything else. And, I just commend her, and I'll always have a high regard for her because, who could ask somebody to do that, We actually live 4 houses down from each other. We see each other at different places, and there's a lot of space between us too, but there's a lot of mutual respect too, and especially on my end. I mean, I'll never forget that. That was one of the nicest things anybody's ever done for me was hold me down when I was going through all that. Yeah.
What about your family? What's your family's reaction to this?
So that's a big part of my book too. My mom, she actually just got out of a hip surgery today, and it was fantastic. Praise God. But she's just like my biggest supporter. She's just a lovely, tough, strong woman who's been through everything and comes out with a smile on her face. And I didn't talk to her for a long time until I got indicted. And then she started reaching out to me when I was in prison, and it actually restored our relationship. And, she's the center of my world now. And I admire her. She's been through so much tough stuff. And, I'd like to emulate her attitude towards life where you can break your hip and laugh about it. Like that's just fantastic. My father, on the other hand, he took my case pretty personally. He's like a staunch conservative from Texas. And so it kind of became like my son's a January 6th defendant and they won't do this to him. And then I pled guilty, and he looked at me like, "How dare you plead guilty to this, Daniel? You're supposed to stand up and fight this thing." And I'm like, "Dad, I'm going to go to prison for 10 years if I fight this thing." I looked at the comparable cases. I knew what I was getting myself into. I had good advice around me. I was very focused on my case. I had a great result. But pleading guilty for him was like a bridge too far. And so he completely cut ties with me. He stopped talking to me. He didn't reach out to me in prison at all. Just kind of, and our relationship is still strained to this day because of it.
So even though you have talked since you've gotten out of prison, it's drastically affected your relationship with
Yeah,
your dad.
it's been quite a while since I've spoken to my father, unfortunately.
Now, how long were you in prison for?
So I was in prison for 9.5 months. And I know that seems kind of underwhelming for everything, but I had a fantastic public defender. Like I had this just a gritty and like very devoted to my case public defender. And when you have a long indictment and you're in communication with somebody, like you're gonna like form some type of a bond with them. And she saw my case from my perspective. She's like, "Wait a minute, some of this stuff doesn't actually add up. I don't think you're actually. I see you're guilty here, but I don't think you're guilty here. I do think they're being a little bit hard on you, and so forth." And so she fought tooth and nail with me. And the prosecution, they gave us a plea agreement. The plea agreement gave us the right to argue about what actually happened at sentencing. We fought for some very small words. Like I got them to change like 10 words in the statement of offense. Basically said that like my hand touched an officer's baton, and then 15 seconds later they fell down the stairs. So we're arguing about these 15 seconds, and we went into court with a package, and it was like a 36 photo thing, and it was very elaborate. She hired a like a private investigator to like go through all these videos and everything and to prove where I was. And I mean, it was just a fantastic defense from a public defender. They don't get enough credit, by the way. People think that they're not good attorneys. You can get a six-figure robust defense from a public defender if they're invested in it. So the prosecution asked for 6 years. We ended up getting 30 months. The judge took my side on a lot of things. I faced the Honorable Judge Amy Berman Jackson. She's a very, like they would say, anti-Trump judge, but I have nothing but esteem for her because I wrote her a letter, and it was like 3 pages of like regret and remorse and accountability. And this is what happened. These are my, history with drugs. This is all the mistakes I've made. And then the girl I was dating, she wrote a letter to the judge too. And she's like, "Look, I'm not a Trump supporter. And you can look at me and see that I'm probably not a Trump supporter, but this is the man that I believe in. And he's a good man. And I've been living with him." And, you put all that together, and the judge was actually moved by it. And she was like, "Daniel, I see that you're a man who has potential." And she actually said a lot of really nice things to me before she sent me to prison, and they stuck with me. And I told her, I said, "I'm going to do two things. I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to open a gym when I get out." And that's what I've been working on now.
So while you're in prison, does the drug use continue or do you get sober?
Oh, I get sober. Like prison was amazing. Like I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I didn't go to a tough prison. I went to a low security prison, so it was like a dorm. So you're not locked behind like a door all day long. So you can go outside, you can wear tennis shoes. There's a place to work out. It wasn't that bad. And I'd been under like, it's actually worse waiting to go to prison than it is being in prison because uncertainty is horrible. And so when I got to prison, I knew that I was going to be getting out. I got a relatively light sentence. It was going to be like a year and a half, at the most in actual prison time. And so I got to like kind of put my feet up a little bit and just be like, okay, the pressure's off. So I started working out. Like there was no drugs to do, but I didn't want to anyways. There was no alcohol. I did drink prison hooch twice. I mean, maybe 3 times. I'll be honest about that.
Prison hooch?
Yeah, they make alcohol out of like fruit, and they ferment it with like sugars and stuff like that. And I don't know the process, but there are things in prison you can get. I had a really cool, like, I had a good cellmate, and like, he was a good guy to hang out with. And there were a couple nights that maybe we did drink some hooch, but for overwhelmingly, the experience in prison was great. I mean, it was, a lot of time for self reflection. And before I'd gone in, everybody was like, Daniel, you need to write a book. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to write a book. What do you mean? And so I sat down with a pen and paper and I started banging this book out, you know, and I found a starting place for it. And I just wrote, I went backwards. I told my life story. And then as I'm writing the book coincides with current events. So, you know, like you'll read in the book, I'm writing about the assassination attempt on Trump. I wrote that like maybe 7 hours after it happened, you know, so it's very like, almost like a war. It's almost like a war memoir, you know what I mean? Where it's like, you know, this is what happened and this is what's going on and so on and so forth. But I take about 4 hours a day and I just sit down with a pen and I just keep working away at this manuscript, you know, and I'm just writing it and writing it. And, you know, the election happens. I write all about the election. It was the craziest election. And I had to watch the whole thing from in prison. And of course, you know, Trump's saying he's going to pardon us. And then, you know, the Democrat side is like, these guys don't ever deserve to be pardoned. And it's kind of the crux of the election was a lot of it was January 6th. And so the election happens. I ended up throwing a pizza party on the election. I got all these pizzas made and everything. And the election happens. And, you know, then, you know, the woman I was dating, she breaks up with me. And so like my book just drops. Like it goes from like all this high hope and ask like everything's going to go well to like, oh my goodness. Like, cause it was the first time I realized what it was like to be in prison. You know, I mean, in there with guys who've done 20 years and I'm kind of like hop skipping and jumping around. And then like I lose my connection to the outside through the girl I was dating. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Like this is a horrible way to live. And I start looking at, you know, the other inmates who've done like 10, 15 years and like my respect level for them, it just goes through the roof because I'm like, you guys have internalized like some of the hardest suffering a man can go through, like to watch his family just move on without him. And that's why the book's called The Men from the Medium. It's about the men who were in the medium prison who came over. It's kind of like a subplot. But
You're still working on this book?
so I am this book will be published in the next 3 months, no matter what condition it's in. I'm so done with this thing. But no, I am like, so I had to go back and edit it one more time. And there's, you know, clarity, redundancy, showing versus telling, a whole bunch of different things that, you know, a good editor will do. The problem is that if the wrong person edits it, they can take a lot of the guts of the book out because it was written as in prison. And I'm the only person who really understands what I was saying or why I was saying it. So I've taken it upon myself to do one more edit of the book. And I'm on chapter 4 and I've had to buy a computer for this. I haven't had a computer the whole time. I've done everything on my phone, you know?
Really?
Yeah, I've got this thing from I have it right next to me, but I have it from a paper manuscript to a phone to a Word document by talk to texting it into my phone.
So once you get out of prison, you were there for 9.5 months, you said. How are you piecing back your life? How are you piecing your life back together?
So it was wild because I literally watched myself get pardoned on television in the pavilion of the prison. And my case manager comes in and she calls me into the office and she's like, "Hey Daniel, we got a letter from the administration. You just been pardoned by the president." And I'm just like bawling, like you got it, like that doesn't happen, you know. And then 3 hours later, I'm walking out the door. They signed our paperwork. They brought some guys in to sign our paperwork out, and I'm walking out the door. And I get out of prison and I have nowhere to go. You know, I was invested in that relationship. I'd expected to be going there. I didn't have any real family support. You know, I called my dad, asked for help. Hey, can you help me get a place? He said no. And so I was like, okay, you know, I'm on my own. And so I went and I slept on my friend Tim's couch, and then eventually I moved into a gym, and I slept on the floor of a gym for, you know, a few weeks. A buddy of mine, a good friend, offered me a job with a signing bonus. That was enough to get me on my feet. Moved back into the apartment that my friend moved out of. I've been here ever since. And
What do you mean you moved into a gym?
I moved into a gym. Like a buddy of mine owned a martial arts school, and he said, "Hey, if you come work for me, I can give you a place to sleep in here as well." So I got an air mattress and right back to it, you know.
So then take me to where you are now since that.
So, you know, I had to like really fight to get some stability first. I had to, you know, had to get a job, and I had to, you know, secure a place to live. And eventually those things, they came. You know, I had some tough times at first, and eventually I found a place that was happy to have me. And they don't know much about my past, or I don't think they do, but you know, I don't talk about it. But I've been there. I've been at a place for almost a year now. I'm very well received there. It's a job I'm happy to do. You know, it pays the bills. And so I finished the book. I got out and I had to write, you know, retroactively about, you know, getting pardoned and everything else and the relationship ending. So I finished the book. Then I started overthinking it, and I was like, okay, well, I need to find the perfect editor. I need to find the perfect this. And I did a few podcasts. People were interested. And I sent the book to about 5 or 6 other people who I trusted, and every single one of them read it in like 2 days. They're like, I would get messages at like midnight. I'm still reading your book. Oh my goodness. I'm like, what? What do you mean? you know? And these were like, people I know that were academic and, the people whose opinion I trusted. And so I finally started believing in it. I was like, maybe I wrote a good book, or at least a book worth reading. And so about 5 months ago, me and a buddy of mine, we went partnership on a gym. And so I've been building a gym, and I've been building a kickboxing program and a fitness program. I've been working a job, and I've been editing a manuscript and I've been, and all these things are kind of converging at the same time. And that kind of takes you to where I am today.
Do you have any regrets, or do you have thoughts where you wish you would have done certain things differently? And I don't just mean anything related to January 6th, but throughout your life, do you look back? What do you think?
I think the biggest regret in my life is that I look back on my marriage and I wish I would have been mature enough to know how to end a relationship correctly, you know? And because I, that's one of my biggest regrets is not knowing how to, walk away like a gentleman and, realize when things are not working, realize when you're the problem. I'd say that's probably the one thing I regret. Outside of everything else, I don't really regret much of it. And I don't say that obnoxiously. It's just that I know that like I had to go through these things to get to the place I'm at now. And if none of that would have happened, I probably would have been, I probably would have just walked into another disastrous situation. And so I look at January 6th as like being the grace of God, because like I feel like I was probably headed to prison anyways. The way I was living, I was very tumultuous, very upset all the time, drugs and alcohol everywhere, bitterness, angerness, that's going to lead to an expected end. And fortunately for me, it was a situation where, I had to face some real consequences, but they were taken away. And so I will never, I can't say I regret it because that's not true. But what I will say is I would never do anything like that. I would never invite anything like that into my life ever again.
Who's Danny Gray in 3 words?
This is a good question. You got me stuck for a second. Just a guy. Just a guy.
Your life is still a work in progress, it sounds like. I mean, I
Hmm.
think we're all just a work in progress, but it sounds like it's still ongoing,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And I own that too. I'm not a guru. Like I don't have any great wisdom for you. It's better for me to just lay the facts of my life out as they are. And if anybody wants any sort of what my perspective on that is, I'm happy to give it. But I'm not somebody I don't have answers, and I don't expect people to think I have answers. I have a crazy story to tell, and a lot of it is a survival story, and a lot of it is just the grace of God because it could have gone a completely different direction on so many different ways. And now I'm at a place where it's like, life is peaceful and it's enjoyable, and I know how to enjoy the small things again. And I've taken that away from myself. So, that's what I've got to offer.
It sounds like you're really embracing gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. How could I not? How could I not? I was in prison with guys who were doing 10 times the time that I was doing. And this is in my book too, but like there's a gentleman that I met, and he goes by the name Snake in prison, right? And he was arrested under the crime bill, where the crack cocaine stuff, three strikes you're outlaws, and yeah, he sold crack, that's what he did. But he got 25 years on his third offense. And it's a non-violent. I'm not making excuses for drug dealers, but when you've been to prison, 25 years is an unbelievably long amount of time. And, so he's been in for like 19 years. And every day he wakes up and he goes out and he does like 500 push-ups. And I did the math on that, right? He's done like 3.5 to 4 million push-ups since he's been in prison, just every day, knocking them out, right? Goes to church and like, you ask him every day, how you doing? He goes, I'm blessed, brother. I'm really blessed. And I'm like, so one day I was talking to him about his case, and I'm like, man, it's horrible. And he looks at me and he goes, but crime was really bad back then, so they had to do what they had to do. And like I was just like blown away. I was like, oh my goodness, like I have nothing to be upset about. If this man can be at peace with losing a quarter century of his life, and his wife and his kids are grown, having grandkids he has no idea about, like I don't have any right to be upset. You know what I mean? Like I don't have any right to be bitter. And I believe God brought these people into my life to really show me something, and yeah, so I got the kind of grace that nobody in prison gets, like to get pardoned. Like I don't even have a criminal record, so like how could I ever look at that as being anything but wonderful?
What are your thoughts on Danny's story? What are your own pivotal moments that reshaped your life in ways you never expected? What are you feeling? Talk to me. If you're enjoying this podcast, click the subscribe button. If you have a similar experience you'd like to share, drop me an email or a DM at Open Hearts, Hidden Truths.